For the past 10 years, many of us have heard of Falun Gong, the practice, the beliefs, and also the struggle they are having within China. Today I'm happy to have with me spokesperson for the Falun Gong in Canada, Mr. Joel Chipkar, who will hopefully be able to shed more light on this spiritual phenomenon and the issues it faces today. Joel, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris.
So Joel, for those of us who don't know, what exactly is Falun Gong and what are the basics of the beliefs?
Well, Falun Gong is what's called a full cultivation practice for the mind and the body. Back in China, in ancient China, these teachings that we know today, like Tai Chi or Qigong, were used to not only strengthen the body energy, but also to unlock the wisdom in the mind in order for people to reach their spiritual perfection. Much like many of the ancient teachers like the Buddha or Lao Tzu, who brought in Taoism, these were very profound, powerful teachings. And Falun Gong is also based in this essence of this belief that in order to unlock your enlightenment, you have to assimilate to universal principles, principles that make the universe kind of go round. And Falun Gong believes that the essence of every molecule in the world, everything that we see, like this table or a tree or a chair, has a characteristic. And each characteristic of each molecule is what the Chinese call Zhen Shen Ren, or truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Like a tree doesn't know how to hate. You know, a bird doesn't know how to be jealous. They just are. And Falun Gong believes that the human being as well can assimilate once again closer to this universal characteristic of truth, compassion, and forbearance. And once we do, that we will automatically unlock our spiritual awareness in our enlightenment. So Falun Gong itself is a way of life. People incorporate these principles of Zhen Shen Ren, truth, compassion, and forbearance, in their everyday life. So we as practitioners try to eliminate our selfishness. You know, we try to eliminate our anger and learn what it means to really truly be a good person. And the beauty of the practice itself is its practicality. Like, although it's steeped in so many thousands of years of culture, it's good for today. Like, there's no worship or ritual, there's no dogma, there's no money involved. Practitioners can come and go as they please. There's no membership lists. So it's a very free and very empowering teaching that helps people in their daily lives on a daily basis.
So it doesn't sound like something that would be a threat to anyone. So why is the Chinese government so against it?
Well, in order to answer that question, I have to give you a bit of history on China and also on the Communist Party. China is a country steeped in 5,000 years of culture, and in this 5,000 years, the entire society believed that gods existed. All the art that you see in China, everything, all the artifacts, not only from China, but cultures around the world, these artifacts were created to exalt gods, to pay homage to gods. All the ancient dance was done to say thanks to gods. Like, people all believed in gods. And with this came tremendous faith and tremendous spirit. People had spirit and faith and power. When the Communist Party came into China, it was Mao Zedong and his gang who imported communism from the West into China, and basically, through a violent campaign, initiated this new communist teaching into China. And with it came the number one principle that in order to suppress the people, you have to eliminate their spirit. You have to kill their spirit. You have to eliminate their faith. And this is exactly what the communist government did. In 1966, they started what was called the Cultural Revolution. And in the Cultural Revolution, they basically eliminated in people's minds that gods existed, that gods did not exist, and that the Communist Party was God, that the Communist Party could control heaven and earth, and the Communist Party was great, glorious, and correct. So you don't need a God. All you need to do is put your faith in communism, in the Communist Party. And I'm not making this up. This was actually in the Communist Manifesto. So in this time, from 1966 right up until the end of the mid-70s, the communist government eliminated people's faith by violent campaigns, by destroying hundreds of thousands of temples and shrines, and by indoctrinating in people that there is no such thing as God. So now you have inside China a very atheistic faith, a very atheistic society, which, who have their religions. They have Buddhism and Taoism and Christianity. But these religions are forced to swear allegiance over the Communist Party, over their belief in God. So every religion in China today is controlled by the Communist Party. If you're not, then you're banned a heretical organization and you're persecuted. But when the Cultural Revolution ended in the late 70s, the government started getting concerned because after eliminating the faith of people, they started to get sick. They started to get diseases. It's a very common principle that if your mind is peaceful, your body will follow. If your mind is plagued, or if you have no faith, you're going to start getting sick. And in the 1980s, the communist government started letting back into China some of these spiritual treasures from the past, like Tai Chi and Qigong, that used to be full cultivation practices for the mind and the body, but now they were only for healing and fitness. They were only for the body. So the regime did not allow the spiritual aspect, they only allowed the physical aspect. And in the 1980s, you had a huge Qigong boom, and millions upon millions of people started to practice Qigong and started to become fit. In 1992, the founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Hongzhi, debuted Falun Gong into China. And Falun Gong once again brought not only the exercise regime to help healing and fitness, but also the cultivation practice for the mind. So he brought back into China the full cultivation practice of mind and body. And then from 1992 to 1994, it was very respected in China. It was awarded by the actual communist regime. It was supported by the regime. It was endorsed by the regime in order for the founder to give classes all over China. It was awarded the Star Qigong School in 92 and 93. And the Public Security Bureau, which is like the FBI, congratulated Falun Gong for bringing back the crime-fighting virtues into society.
Oh.
It spread across China faster than any spiritual teaching in history, until 1994 came around. And when 1994 came around, the communist government approached the founder and he said, we want to start charging money for this teaching because it's so powerful. We want to start charging money because it's
popular.
It's popular. And the founder said, no, this is a cultivation practice. It's for the spirituality of the people, and it's not to be capitalized. It's not for sale. So he distanced himself from the arm of the communist government that was kind of overseeing Tai Chi and Qigong. And at that point, the communist government started to attack him. So from 94 to 1999, these abuse continued to happen. And in 1999, the communist leader at the time, Jiang Zemin, ordered a violent persecution against Falun Gong when his survey found that over 100 million Falun Gong practitioners were practicing in China. That's about 1/12 of every Chinese person in China, including high-ranked Communist Party members and their families. So experts say he was very politically insecure and jealous, and he used Falun Gong as a political tool to kind of fluff his feathers and show fear to his political circle and also the rest of China. And from 1999 until today, every human rights organization in the world, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, have documented the atrocities happening inside China. Over 100 million people are forced into exile. Hundreds of thousands are being tortured in labor camps today. And tens of thousands of people have been murdered in police custody. So today, Falun Gong is the #1 human rights atrocity happening in China today.
Well, many say that the Chinese government cracked down on Falun Gong because they were afraid that spiritual practice like Falun Gong could overtake the government, something which had been done in previous dynasties.
Yeah, I'd say that this is really a moot point. It doesn't make a difference. There's an old saying, don't think about why a crazy person does a crazy thing, or it will drive you crazy too. The issue is, whatever the excuse the Communist Party came up with, there is no excuse for the murder and torture and defamation of millions of people just because they choose to practice their faith of choice, or just because they choose to stand up to protect not only their Chinese constitutional right to believe in their faith, but also their human right to believe in their faith.
But is it not true that Falun Gong has become political, like the Chinese government had feared?
Well, I'd like to ask, what about Falun Gong is political? Falun Gong has never asked for democracy in China. They've never asked to govern China. They've never asked for the communist government to step down. The only thing Falun Gong practitioners want is the end of the persecution and to bring these people responsible to justice. The reality is the Communist Party and their officials are responsible for these mass crimes against humanity. Number one, by their implementing these policies, and number two, by turning their backs and letting these things happen to millions of people under their watch. If a man breaks into your house and rapes your mother and butchers your father to death, and you would you not go to the police or government for help? Would this be considered political? This is exactly what's happening to Falun Gong practitioners all over China. The reports of unlawful arrests, the violence, the beatings, the electrocutions, the rapes, the gang rapes, the forced abortions, the torture, it's just unbelievable what's happening. But listen to this. In 2006, an independent investigation uncovered that based on communist government records, that there have been 41,500 organ transplants that were done that could not be verified on where these organs came from. And through investigations, it was uncovered that these organs had come from murdered Falun Gong practitioners who've been in labor camps or jails and blood tested to match organs for transplant tourists. And these organs were then sold on government websites and through government agencies for up to $160,000 US. Like, these are the issues that Falun Gong practitioners are facing today. Is it not human to want these crimes stopped? Like, if Coca-Cola or IBM were doing these crimes against a group of people and we all rallied to stop it, it wouldn't be seen as political. It's only seen as political because this human rights abuser, this perpetrator, is hiding behind the cloak of a government. So for Falun Gong practitioners to want this stopped, it's not political. But I want to go a little bit deeper on this political label because it's very important. For 60 years, the Communist Party has been brainwashing Chinese people to believe that if anybody attacks the Communist Party or criticizes the Communist Party, then they're against China and against the Chinese people. So this in turn has created hyper-patriotic Chinese who turn around and attack anybody that the regime labels as political or anti-China. And this has been, it's almost like it was an ingenious tool by the communist regime to protect them from ostracization from others for their crimes. So you have Amnesty International, who's seen as an anti-China organization because they're actually trying to stop the torture of Chinese people by the communist regime. But you get the actual Chinese people standing up and attacking Amnesty International, attacking the very organization that's trying to protect them because they firmly believe that this organization is political because the regime has labeled it political and anti-China. So this is the kind of mindset you're dealing with inside China today when the regime targets anybody or labels people as political.
Well, another label, Falun Gong has also been branded as a cult by the Chinese government. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the Tibetans are terrorists. The Uyghurs are criminal. Falun Gong is a cult. Human rights lawyers who help people inside China, their human rights, are subversive. The Dalai Lama is a separatist. Amnesty International is anti-China. On and on and on these labels go. You know, at this time in our life, if anybody believes a thing that the Communist Party is saying about anything, then I think it's time you wake up and smell the poison coffee. You know, since 2000, Amnesty International has debunked the cult label on Falun Gong. And just recently, the United Nations wrote a report that stated the stigmatization of political against Falun Gong has created a conspiracy theory against the group that has aided in its persecution. Let's look at the facts, though. Since 1994, Falun Gong has been practiced in 60 countries around the world by millions of people, and it's been translated into 13 different languages. Not one person anywhere in the world has ever been convicted or arrested for any illegal acts anywhere in the world. All our appeals around the world have been awarded for our rational and peaceful appeals. There's no money about Falun Gong whatsoever. If you want to join Falun Gong, it's absolutely free. There's no worship or rituals. There's no dogma about it. Falun Gong teaches, to respect your family, to be more responsible as a human being, to live by the principles of truth, compassion, and forbearance. From World War II to the Bosnian genocide to Rwanda, the number one weapon in every genocide campaign is propaganda. Propaganda is used to hide a regime's crimes and also to dehumanize the victims so they can be murdered with no complications. Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's propaganda minister, and Joseph Goebbels stated, if you tell a lie long enough, people will start to believe it. And this principle was used in the elimination of 6 million people. In 2003, a Rwandan radio station owner and a Rwandan newspaper owner were both sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of over 800,000 minority Tutsis in the Rwandan genocide through propaganda over their medium. And the judge said at the sentencing, without lifting a machete or a firearm, you have caused the deaths of thousands of people. This is the power of propaganda. Propaganda is used to hide a regime's crimes, and it's used to dehumanize a victim so they can be killed by the perpetrator. How else can German human beings murder 6 million people? How else can Chinese doctors butcher 41,500 Falun Gong practitioners in order to extract their organs for sale? They can do this because they don't look at Falun Gong practitioners as human. They look at them as political or cult members or criminal, and this is the issue, and this is what we're faced with. And this is why we have to be more aware of this propaganda and the power that it brings.
Yeah, so it's actually been 12 years since the official crackdown, and the Chinese government says that they've actually crushed Falun Gong in China. Mm-hmm. Have they?
Well, if they have, then why are they still threatening our government officials to remain silent to the Falun Gong appeals? Or why do they keep sending letters to our city officials threatening them that if they have Falun Gong Day, or they write a proclamation for Falun Gong, that they will lose business ties in China? It's because Falun Gong has not been eliminated. In 2006, a Chinese embassy official stationed in Australia defected from the Chinese embassy because of his conscience, and he stated to media that the Chinese government could not understand the peaceful appeals of Falun Gong to protect their freedom of belief. Now they cannot let the international community know what they've done to Falun Gong. This is the issue. The Communist Party is responsible for heinous crimes against humanity, and their number one mandate is to hide these crimes from society so they will not be brought to justice. This is the issue that Falun Gong faces today, and why the communist government is so afraid of the voice of Falun Gong.
But don't you think we have to engage China in order to affect change?
I think that people who say that we have to engage China are either ignorant to the true face of this regime, or they're just interested in business and they don't really care about human rights. The reality is our government has engaged China for years, and still the human rights is deteriorating in China. You cannot engage the Chinese government unless you dance the way the Chinese government tells you to dance. They're a bully regime who will not change for anybody, and those who think they will are wasting their time, or basically just creating a smokescreen so they can do their business with China, without worrying about human rights.
So I guess you don't agree with the scholars who say that human rights are improving in China.
Well, I think that these China scholars are basically just China apologists. They base the human rights improvement on the economic changes that China has went through recently, which really only affect a very small minority groups inside China. Ask the Tibetans if ask the Tibetans if human rights have improved in China, or ask the Falun Gong practitioners who are still languishing in labor camps today or being cut open for their organs if human rights are improving in China. Or ask the Uyghurs up in the autonomous region who are being ethnically cleansed as we speak if human rights are improving. Or the Tiananmen Square mothers who 30 years after their children were butchered in Tiananmen Square are beaten and tortured in jails if they appeal for their rights to mourn the death of their children. Ask them if human rights have improved. The reality is human rights have not improved. Chinese government continues to be the #1 human rights abuser in the world, and those who ignore this are basically just implorable.
So Joel, what do you feel the answer is to all of this, and where do you see Falun Gong within China in the future?
Well, I think the most important thing for us to remember is watch the signs for the Communist Party. They're the biggest liar that are in our world today. You Google China denies and you get over 5 million hits. Whenever something happens in China, they always tell people to stay out of their internal affairs, or that this is a political issue, or we deny it. Whenever you hear this, you know exactly that China is lying. And I think that we have to continue to remember this and keep supporting those who are standing up to help the human rights for the Chinese people within China today.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, Joel.